Good evening to you on this chilly Tuesday night when there's snow on the hills. You have to wrap up, keep warm. One good thing about the snow is that it reminds you you're still alive because you feel cold. So tonight is Q&A night, so we have a few questions here to answer. So the first question is, what is the difference between dedicating merit to a dead relative and spreading metta to the living? So it's traditional for us as Buddhists when our loved ones, family, friends pass away, that we'll dedicate merit to them in different ways. So we might say at a funeral we'll invite monks to chant the Mattika, the verses from the Pali, the Abhidhamma, and it's traditional to offer robes to monks in the name of the dead, dedicate the good karma generated from that action to the one who's passed away, and make other offerings, donations, money or food, other things, and dedicate this to the dead. And it's a skillful way to remember the dead, do wholesome things at a time when you're experiencing grief. And the teaching we have is that it can work, it can help if the person who's passed away, particularly if they're in a realm of suffering, hungry ghost realm, then they may receive and rejoice in that merit because of their karmic connection with the living. They receive that merit, their mind becomes happier, and then that may even lead to them be reborn in a better place. And even if it doesn't, nothing is lost because we're doing good things for ourselves, the living as well. And we're honouring and remembering the dead in a good way. Spreading metta is usually the term we use more for the living. So it's a practice the Buddha encouraged us to do every day, in both the form of meditation on the theme of loving kindness, spreading thoughts of loving kindness to oneself, to others, and that includes family, friends, but then neutral beings and beings you may have hostility towards or are hostile towards you. So it's a meditation that you spread to yourself and then outwards, developing this thought and intention of goodwill. So it's a good feeling, it's good thought, and if you develop one-pointedness, samadhi, then it can be quite a powerful object of mind and can really boost yourself and then boost others, can have a good feeling. If you're ever fortunate enough to have somebody with a powerful mind, a good mind, spread metta to you, you might even feel something very pleasant. It can change your mood very quickly and you feel much better. So of course that's something that is tangible for the living. You can't be sure what happens to someone after they die. And so we dedicate acts of merit, acts of goodness to them. But for the living, metta is something tangible. Goodwill is something you see on a person's face, you see it in their actions, their speech, or even if you're in a different place, you don't physically see them, you can feel, maybe perhaps feel the metta coming from someone in a different place. when they send their thoughts to you. Sometimes it's beyond words, hard to describe the actual effect from one person to another of spreading metta. Sometimes it's, as I said, it can be tangible. Certainly when you do an act of kindness, you help somebody, well, they know that, they see that. Or your face expresses kindness, metta, or your words do. When it's a meditation, it's more subtle, so maybe they don't notice immediately or aware, but it sets in process a train of cause and effect, karma, good karma, which can improve relations between people, soften people's states of suffering. Just as metta improves our own state of mind, well, it can also have an effect on those around you. Help them to calm down if they're feeling stressed or angry. And over the years as a monk, practicing as a monk, you get to both witness and hear about other monks who have spread metta and helped somebody who was sick or depressed or suffering, and maybe had a good effect on them by spreading metta through meditation, or sometimes through the Dhamma teachings they give, but they're coming from a place of very strong metta. So this always happens with teachers such as Luang Por Chah and many other teachers. People come into contact with them and it's as if the dark clouds of their mind lift because of the metta of the teacher. It can happen. One of the famous stories in Thailand of this is the teacher Ajahn Kalyano, Dhamma. He was the one Ajahn Chah praised, the arahant in the city, the one who practiced and became enlightened living in Wat Tapsa in middle of Bangkok, maybe 50 years ago now, a long time ago. And there's one occasion somebody in Europe was lying ill in bed with cancer, and they had a vision one morning, early morning at dawn, of this monk, this Thai Buddhist monk, radiating loving kindness to them, and they felt very elated, and they received a sort of feeling of rapture and joy arising in their heart, and that was the beginning of their recovery. And they always remembered what this monk looked like, and that it was a Thai Buddhist monk, even though they'd never met that monk before. So eventually they travelled, later on when they were better, they travelled back to Thailand and sought out the monk until they are asking around and looking at pictures and asking around. They came to meet Ajahn Kalyano in his monastery, his temple in Bangkok, and he didn't admit it. A bit like the spies, he said, I can neither confirm nor deny. He didn't use those words, but that was the meaning. He didn't confirm that he had spread metta to this person, but the person was convinced he'd seen Ajahn Kalyano. He had a vision of him, a dream of him, and it seemed to have had a very good effect. So sometimes the spreading of metta is, if it's coming from somebody with a very pure, powerful mind, we call it metta apamanya. It's immeasurable, boundless, and maybe it goes out to help beings in different places who are suffering. It's beyond words. It's not always just sort of, I'm going to help this person. It's just the metta coming from the pure mind can help many beings, anyone who comes into contact with it. So it's a very special kind of good karma, special kind of state of mind. Another question: what is the karma that has neither bright nor dark results? Well, they call that the karma for the ending of karma. So sometimes the Buddha talked about karma. It's the karma that is bright, with bright results. So that's good karma, good intention, non-ill will, non-greed, non-delusion. Karma that originates from a wholesome intention. It's bright and it brings bright results. It brings pleasant feeling and good results in one form or another. Then there's what we call dark karma, which brings dark results. So the intention, the origination of that karma is an unwholesome mental state, greed, anger, delusion. So it brings some form of painful feeling and unpleasant consequences as a result. And then there's some karma that's a bit of a mixture, both bright and dark at the same time, because one's intention can alter. One has a good intention, but then some negativity slips into the train of thought and some unwholesome karma is made. And as long as there's still attachment to the five khandhas and the sense of self, there's always a little bit of kilesa, we say, mental defilement there, even when you're making good karma. But then the karma that is neither bright nor dark is the karma for the ending of karma, so we call that the Eightfold Noble Path, is that kind of karma. It's cultivating this path to bring the mind to the realization of the Four Noble Truths, the end of suffering, nirvana, letting go of self, reaching the unconditioned. So this is beyond the whole round of karma and result of karma. You know, people always ask where the mental defilements come from. Well, they come from making karma and then receiving the fruits of karma, what we call vibhaka, which bring both pleasure and pain back to us because it's bright and dark, and that stimulates craving, liking or disliking, wanting, not wanting, grasping, attachment, sense of self. So this is what we call a cycle, karma, result, which feeds more ignorance and attachment, which feeds more karma making, more results, more mental defilement. So it's a kind of self-perpetuating cycle, whereas Nibbana is coming out of that cycle, getting to the point where one goes beyond bright and dark karma, and the Arahant makes no more karma. People ask, well, what if an Arahant, an enlightened person who's reached Nibbana, what if they do something good? Isn't that karma? Isn't that coming from an intention? And they say, no, it's not. It's pure, coming from the pure mind. It's pure wisdom, pure compassion. So they can act in good ways. They teach, or they help, or advise, or support. But there's no karma made. It's what we call giriya citta. It's just action, skillful action, but with no karmic consequences, because the Arahant has no more attachment to self, and they won't be reborn. So another question. Hello, I hope the Sangha is well. I have a question for Lumpur for the next session. My question is, Lumpur, you once said that some people get very peaceful when they practice during the dukkha of illness and aging. Could you please explain and expand on this, please? Well, obviously, illness and aging are very normal experiences that every human being will go through in one way or another. So although we classify them as dukkha, painful, unpleasant experiences, nobody wants to be ill, no one wants to get old, they can be great teachers. And often dukkha is the trigger for practice. arising of faith, putting effort into the practice because we see the suffering in life. We look for a way out of suffering. So aging and illness and other forms of dukkha, they're often stimulating the practice. And that, even though it's a painful stimulation, it can be very useful to us. It can prompt us to contemplate things, let go, understand our mind better, understand what are the causes of suffering, the attachment and clinging, the ignorance that is causing us suffering. Sometimes you suffer and that prompts wisdom to arise, so then you practice to the point where you can let go. You establish mindfulness, contemplate the impermanence of your body and the happiness and pleasure of this world because you're seeing the suffering of aging and sickness. So you let go. You let go of craving and attachment. So ultimately suffering is our teacher, and it's because of suffering that you end up getting enlightened. If we didn't suffer, we wouldn't need to practice. We wouldn't need Buddhist teachings. The Buddha wouldn't have become the Buddha if it wasn't for suffering. The whole point is it's experiencing suffering is what leads the Buddha into the practice and looking for the way out of suffering and to transcend suffering. This is where you get the teaching the Four Noble Truths arising from the mind that's penetrated, understood what is suffering, its cause, realized the cessation of suffering, cultivated the path that has led to the cessation of suffering. So, some of our best teachers are the painful ones. Illness, pain, aging can be very good teachers. Having said that, it tends to be the people who work best or do best with aging and illness are people who've already got a foundation in practicing Dhamma, because of course it is also good to practice the Dhamma when you're young, healthy, strong. Put all your intelligence and mental and physical strength into the practice. And it's better to do that when you're young. So start young, the younger the better. But then later maybe when you do encounter various kinds of illness, injury or just aging, if you have a foundation in the Dhamma practice, you know how to practice dana, keep precepts, live in a virtuous way, you know how to be mindful, you know how to meditate, you know how to contemplate and reflect on impermanence and karma and the selfless nature of physical, mental phenomena. You've done all that for a while, then when you encounter some illness or the suffering of aging, the decline of the body, aches and pains and so on, you're more prepared for it. And so the stimulus, the added suffering of illness or aging can then lead you to really try harder in your practice, because you know how to let go, and you maybe let go even more than before because you see the suffering of holding on. And one of the dangers when we're healthy, young, strong, we get deluded by it and we become a little bit complacent or heedless in our life, and we forget to practice and we identify with what we can do, who we are, who we think we are, and we often actually create a lot of mental stress and suffering by all that attachment. Whereas once you become ill or you're getting older, you've often learnt some lessons and you're more mature in your approach to things and you see things more clearly. I mean, not always, but it's possible. So then the aging or the illness can be the stimulation for you to let go even more than before, and you wake up to the truth. Another thing is that pain or discomfort can make us very mindful. And as we know, mindfulness is central to the practice. When you're in pain or suffering, it makes you much more aware in the present moment. It can help to cut off a lot of thoughts about the past, the future. So particularly as you get older, there's less need to plan the future and get lost in dreams of the future. The past, memories of the past maybe recede a little bit, so it's possible to maybe keep your mind in the present moment more successfully. Maybe your mindfulness improves and your samadhi improves because you're willing to let go of a lot of distractions based around the senses, seeking sense pleasure, seeking distraction. Another thing is, the older you get, maybe if you've been practicing a long time, well, you've done it more, so you're better at it. And then you encounter the problems of aging or some illness, you're ready for it and you can use that as a stimulus to practice. So sometimes you meet people who have practiced through their life and they reach a point where they do become very ill as they get older, and they really put effort into their practice because now it's at this time when they're ill and old and suffering that they really see the value of practicing mindfulness, developing states of calm, samadhi, letting go of stressful thoughts, worries, anger. And they see the value of keeping their mind in a happy place. And that's one of the results of the practice, isn't it? You learn to manage your mind, your mental well-being better, and create the causes for your mental well-being. So some people are very sick, but they're very serene, and they're really letting go. Whereas some people who are very healthy are all over the place. We're attached, we're scattered, we're distracted, we're identifying with all these thoughts and feelings and all our plans and who we want to be, what we wanted to become, and we suffer more because of it. None of this is guaranteed. You can be practicing well when you're healthy and you can not be practicing when you're ill, of course, but illness can prompt you, gives you a sense of urgency to put more effort into your practice. You try harder and you're more willing to let go because you almost have no choice. When you're ill, you often have to let go of many things very quickly. And if you see that, then you're willing to. No need to spend a lot of time getting angry with other people because you're ill. What's the point? You can't do anything about it anyway. You might as well just let go and dwell in compassion and kindness. There's lots of pleasures and things you might normally attach to that you can no longer enjoy, or you can no longer go out and get those pleasures because you're ill perhaps, so you can let go of them. So there are plenty of people in the past, monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen, it's not just monks, it could be anyone, who have benefited indirectly from being ill or from aging. And they've taken these up as objects for contemplation to see the impermanence of their body, their mind, to see the suffering of holding on to ideas of and the desire for youth, for strength, for health, and so on. And it's actually stimulated wisdom and insight to the point where they've let go. And some people have used their illness to the point where it's been the cause for them to attain, we call it Margapala Nibbana. The factors of the path come together. They're ill, but they're keeping precepts, they're practicing steady mindfulness, contemplating the impermanent nature of feelings, perceptions, thoughts, and so on. And they actually attain some deep insight as they do that, realize one or more aspects of the Four Noble Truths. So that's both in the time of the Buddha, there's many people who did that, and then in this modern era, there's people I know who practice, and their practices come together because of the pressure from illness or aging. So it's never hopeless, and we can always practice even when we're ill. And if you're not ill, well, that's your great merit. We'll use your health to keep practicing, and that will prepare you in case you get ill or for the onset of aging. Another question. What does the term all Dhamma is not self mean? Sabbe Dhamma Anatta. Well, it means what it says. all physical and mental phenomena are without self. There's no abiding self or essence in physical and mental phenomena. Nothing exists sort of indefinitely, just sort of sitting there in the universe, whether it's in physical form, a thought, a feeling, a perception, any state of mind, however exalted. So even states of samadhi, even the highest states of samadhi, jhana, rupa jhana, arupa jhana, they don't just exist as of themselves. They're not a self. They're what we call conditions. So there are causes and conditions that lead to states of samadhi arising. We make good karma and bad karma, and that gives results in rebirth in different realms of existence, and even before we die we are experiencing karma in our mind, different states of mind. But this is cause and effect, isn't it? Cause and result. So the Buddha, one of his practices is to look for a soul or a self in his experience, and he couldn't find one. He couldn't find some kind of abiding self in the physical world, in whatever it is that people attribute to have a soul or a self, mountains, trees, the sky, the universe, and he couldn't find it in the mind either. Sure, we have the thought of a self, but that's coming from ignorance, from delusion. And because that thought keeps reoccurring, because we keep attaching to it, it seems constant, so it seems like we do have a self in our experience. But through persistent effort in investigating, looking and understanding, the Buddha came to the conclusion, well, there's no self in what we call these five khandhas: body, feelings, perceptions, thought formations, sense consciousness. That when the sense of self arises, it's a delusion, it's not the true nature of things. So things are conditioned and they're not existing as of themselves. We say things arise dependent on other things. Another question. Can you expound on your insight into Nibbana? Well, Nibbana is a tricky thing because, as we know, it's something that words can't describe. So now you're asking to describe it with words. It's kind of inevitable that I won't be successful. And we have some description of what Nibbana is. The Buddha did say it's the highest happiness. So that in itself should give you a clue that it's worth looking for and practicing for, because it's the highest happiness. Everything else takes second place. Everything else pales. Nibbana is the highest happiness. It's, the mind of Nibbana lights up the universe like nothing else lights up the universe. It's boundless, it's unattached, it doesn't settle on anything, so it's beyond time and place. It doesn't need a place, it doesn't need a universe or a world or a country or a house or any of those things. It doesn't need it. It's beyond that. So the mind of Nibbana doesn't need any of these things, it's unattached. So it's the highest happiness, and it's also free from suffering. It's that quality that has the characteristic of being free from suffering, empty of self. It's the unconditioned, it's the unborn, the deathless. I think the easiest one I like to contemplate is the extinction of the defilements that create birth and death and suffering. So like a fire going out. If there's no fuel left, then the fire goes out. So that's the simile says, you ask, well, when the fire goes out, where does it go? Does it go to the north, south, east, west? No, it doesn't go anywhere, it's just gone out. That's all you can say. So Nibbana is the extinction of greed, anger, delusion. They're finished. Therefore, no more suffering, no more birth. So it's extinction, the cooling down, and the defilements, which are the opposite of nibbana, they're hot. Greed is hot, anger is hot, delusion is hot, craving, conceit, attachment to views is hot. But it's also enticing, fascinating, so we keep creating a sense of self, keep going away from nibbana because of the power of greed, anger and delusion. And nibbana, just as a description, it doesn't sound that enticing to the average person, because you say, well, in nibbana it's emptiness, it's the unborn, the undying, extinction of kilesa. It sounds kind of boring and uninteresting and unstimulating to you, maybe. So that's why there's so few people who have attained nibbana in the world, because it doesn't sound good. But then suffering doesn't sound good either, so that's one way into nibbana, isn't it? The extinction of suffering. Every time you notice you have any kind of physical or mental pain, stress, suffering, ask yourself, do you want this? Do you like this? No, therefore there are things you need to abandon, which they're the things causing that suffering. You need to abandon greed, anger, delusion, craving, attachment, ignorance, and therefore you need to develop the path, Noble Eightfold Path, which will help you abandon the causes of suffering. So it depends, there's no one way to nibbana. Some people go the way of, they don't like suffering, so they recognize suffering and want out. Other people, the way in is contemplating the impermanent nature of reality and everything in this world. Everything arises, passes away, physical form, mental thought formations, states, even states of samadhi are impermanent. Heaven realms are impermanent. So then you look for something permanent, the permanent happiness, the true happiness of nibbana. Or some people are investigating self and not self, and looking at the conditioned nature of things and realizing that's suffering. Anything that is conditioned relies on all these different causes and factors to arise. It's unreliable. As those causes and factors that gave rise to it change, then that state, that experience changes. It's not any kind of lasting refuge. That's the nature of sankharas. They're impermanent and subject to change, and therefore suffering and not self. What is impermanent cannot be a lasting happy self. So it's not what you want. What you want is something that's lasting, happy. That's nibbana. Not the last question, second to last question. Everything we can define are all sankhara, conditions. And the awareness or the pure consciousness is not conditioned. Sounds like a statement, but I guess there's a sort of question there. Well, yes, we have sankhara are conditions, and as we've just said, they're impermanent, they're suffering, they're not self. Dhamma is not self. Dhamma here means the mind that is seen, realized, the Dhamma, realized nibbana. It's not self, it's the unconditioned. So awareness is it's the quality of the mind that just knows. But when we still are caught into this conditioning process, coming from ignorance, making karma, building up this sense of self through mental formations and attachment to body and mind, well, this awareness I like the idea, it gets hijacked by the sense of self coming from ignorance and karmic formations and craving and attachment. It gets hijacked, so consciousness takes on a self, and so it's conditioned and it's suffering. But if you can see through the delusion of self and let it go, see it as impermanent suffering, not self, a conditioned thing, arising from various causes and conditions. Because of this, there is that. When you can see that with true knowledge and vision, with clear insight, with a mind that's trained in this Noble Eightfold Path, then the delusion of self disappears, so consciousness becomes just knowing, but without a sense of self and without ignorance conditioning it. So it's just knowing. It's just something part of nature. Nobody owns that. It's not a self. It's just a quality of knowing. Just as there are physical elements existing in the world, there's earth, air, fire, water, there's the element of knowing, consciousness. But because we are still conditioned by ignorance, we have a sense of self which hijacks or takes over this consciousness and says, it's me, it's mine. And that's where suffering comes from. So a moment of mindfulness as you're practicing is maybe establishing a better kind of awareness. It's still within, we say, the conditioning process, because even the Noble Eightfold Path is a form of conditioning. But as you establish mindfulness and reflect on the impermanent, selfless nature of phenomena, you're eroding away or pulling away this sense of self. So if you keep doing that long enough, well enough, with every kind of phenomena, everything that we can experience, with every kind of mental defilement, until the mind is thoroughly clear on this point that there is no self in any of it, then consciousness is no longer hijacked by defilement. It's freed. It's like freed from the slavery, being enslaved to the defilements. So in one way, we're attached to this body as a self, so it's like the mind is enslaved by the body or stuck with the body because of ignorance and attachment, craving. We're enslaved by mental formations, perceptions, feelings. The mind is caught up and bound up with them. So we call nirvana the unbound, the unbinding of the mind. It's free, it's liberated. Now it's the last question. It is difficult for me to relate to consciousness, not sense consciousness. It is easy to think about a soul, but I know in Buddhism we don't talk about a soul. Actually, a lot of Buddhists do still use the word soul, but I think I know what you mean. Soul is a term that's come from Christian teaching, the sense of this undying, eternal soul, self, something that lives on. And it's a very attractive idea. It's one kind of view, isn't it? The eternalist view, the eternal soul will go on. If we can have our loved one with us, then even better, we'll go on forever. When I was young, we used to play music called soul. So it's got heart in it. It brings up a lot of positive emotions. It's very stimulating. It's very passionate. So the idea of a soul inspires us, arouses us. But that's part of the delusion, isn't it? If you can see through it, you realize that it's all soulless. As I said, as an idea, it doesn't sound very good. Soullessness sounds pretty boring and dead and dry. But if it's coming from a place of clarity, a mind that is peaceful, has wisdom, has mindfulness, then it can see that this idea of a soul, something unchanging, unmoving, a thing, you can see through that as that it is actually a delusion. Then you reach this higher happiness, where it doesn't matter about something having a soul or no soul or being soulless. It doesn't matter if you reach the highest happiness, does it? But when we're still working on the level of conventional reality, terms and concepts and labels and descriptions of things, then a soul sounds better. As an idea, it sounds better, so many of the world would like to have a soul and stick with their soul. And the idea of anatta, non-self, doesn't sound so good, so often people find it hard to accept as an idea. Of course, if you can see that penetrating the idea of non-self, or experiencing non-self, is free from suffering, then it starts to become a bit more attractive. So they go together, impermanence, or the attachment to permanence, the experience of suffering, and the attachment to the idea of self go together as delusion, as a package. But if you can see impermanence and see the unsatisfactory nature of phenomena that we attach to, and you see the selfless nature, then you're freeing yourself from suffering. But these are things we have to experience through the practice. Of course we can discuss like this, but we have to practice. It's a part of practice. We put effort into cultivating sila, samadhi, panya, to bringing the mind to know the true nature of phenomena, physical phenomena, mental phenomena in the present moment, purify our mind from delusion. That comes through practice. It's experiential. So ultimately that's the way we can experience non-self. So I'll leave it there tonight. Hopefully something in there was useful for you. And we can talk again next time.